Gabe Debenedetti is in Arlington, Virginia. He's a national political reporter for Politico and joins us now to talk about what will be a very interesting week ahead. Dave, what do you make of the president pushing health care, tax reform and immigration security ahead of his 100th day? And do you see any appetite among Republicans to move at all on Obamacare this week?
The short answer is no. I think what we're seeing, obviously, is a huge flurry of activity from the White House. They want the world to be talking about how much they're doing in advance of President Trump's 100 days in office mark on Saturday. What they're desperately afraid of is a raft of stories and a raft of reports basically saying, look, this White House hasn't gotten anything done. So what they're trying to do is jam-pack the congressional schedule, trying to say, look, we're working on health care, we're working on this border wall, we're working on tax reform. Realistically speaking, however, people that I've been speaking with, at least on the Hill, don't exactly seem particularly optimistic that any of these things are going to go through.
And what's interesting is at the center of the spending bill fight is the president's demand that some type of funding be included for a border wall, a first phase at least, to do research and other things. Democrats are staunchly against it, and even Senator Marco Rubio this weekend said this is an issue that should be tackled next year. So why is the White House sticking with this point right now at this early stage?
Yeah, well, the White House basically is tired of the talking point that President Trump promised to build a wall on day one and he hasn't done it yet. So what they're trying to do is front load this. But what you're seeing from a lot of Republicans, like Senator Rubio, is basically a concession that this is unlikely to get through. Democrats are going to say, absolutely not, we're not doing this. And if the government shuts down because of this demand, the blame will be put on Republicans, and that won't be good for anyone in the party, particularly as the 2018 midterms loom. So what they're trying to signal to the White House is we can have this fight, but let's push it off a little bit so that you don't have a government shutdown literally on the 100th day of your tenure. Which
would symbolize to his supporters that he is not coming to Washington to get things done. It really is not what the White House wants. What do you make of the tax reform plan? We don't know much about it, but the president indicated it will be the biggest tax cut ever, in very Trumpian language. But his budget director on Sunday dialed back expectations. What is happening on that front?
Yeah, the language being used to describe it sounds very nice, but we have essentially no details yet. The reality of the situation is that passing tax reform of this magnitude on Capitol Hill is a massive fight, a massive endeavor on both the Republican and the Democratic sides, and there really hasn't been a lot of appetite on either side to take this up in a serious way. They couldn't even get a small beginning of a health care bill passed. The idea that this would be something that they could do in a few days is really not realistic, according to people on both sides of the aisle. But what the White House is trying to do is prove to its supporters and prove to Republicans on Capitol Hill that it is willing to get things done, or at least to try and get things done, to try and get action moving.
It's interesting because, as we've just discussed on all of these initiatives, the president likely is learning that he will need some kind of buy-in from moderate Democrats in either the House or the Senate in some way, shape or form for domestic policy. But the president likely is also realizing how much cooperation is required on the international front. Today, President Trump and Ambassador Nikki Haley had lunch with ambassadors from UN Security Council countries. And during that working lunch, Mr. Trump said, I don't think the UN really solves problems, but it has great potential, right? Another indication that he's softening his language. What do you make of the meeting?
Yeah, well, I think what we're seeing is a negotiation around the reality that President Trump campaigned on this America First platform, and that was essentially what the entire world saw. They saw a president who was going to be a little bit more isolationist, maybe think more about American interests in a more explicit way on the international stage. But what we've also seen is that he has a steep learning curve on the foreign policy front and has essentially said, you know, when I've learned more about these issues, my stance has changed. So he's trying to work through his relationship with the UN now. By all accounts, he has a very good relationship with Nikki Haley, the American ambassador to the United Nations. So we'll see what this looks like moving forward. But as he tries to negotiate his relationship with China, with Russia, with other major countries, including those represented on the Security Council, we're trying to see, what we're seeing is him trying to negotiate this hard-line stance that he had during the campaign and the realities of the world.
And all that being said, including the historically low approval rating at this stage, Gabe, how do you rate the president's performance? Because he does have a few tangibles, pulling out of the TPP, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what we have to keep in mind is this was not a president that had worked with Congress before, that had worked really with the power of the White House before. So he's still clearly learning. That said, he made a lot of campaign promises that he would get X, Y, and Z things done in the first 100 days, and he hasn't done most of them.
All right, Gabe Debenedetti joining us from Washington. Thanks so much for joining us and giving us some of your insight today. Appreciate it.
Thank you.